Okay. All right. Well, welcome to the show, Inquisitive Analyst. My guest today is someone you may know from his YouTube channel, Blackmetric, or perhaps from his popular BA Fringe YouTube series. He's a common fixture in the BA world, has a few books on business analysis, principal consultant at Blackmetric, highly enthusiastic about business analysis and, of course, systems thinking. He's spoken at many BA conferences and has been a president to IIBA UK chapter. Help me welcome to today's show, Adrian Reed. Welcome, Adrian.
Thanks very much for having me, Marcus. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure. And I thought maybe you could talk to us today about a few items. So perhaps my first question to you today is, how did you get into business analysis and why did you choose the field?
Yeah, great question, Marcus. And what I would love to say at this point is that I'd always wanted to be a BA, and I'd planned it from like high school. But the reality is different in that I was working for an insurance company, and I was going to be an underwriter. That's what I thought I wanted to be. But I got involved in what at the time was called e-commerce. It's not what we would now consider e-commerce, but it was insurance brokers would send electronic messages via a system called EDI, electronic data interchange, to insurance companies, and there were always problems with the exchange of data. And so there were projects around getting other partners on board and so on. And before I knew what requirements were on business analysis I started writing requirements, probably very badly, because I didn't know what I was doing. And then the organization had a restructure, and there was this role, business analyst. And I was like, oh, wow. And I started to really look into it, and I started to realize it's much wider than just requirements, and it involves the whole pre-project stuff. Can equally involve the benefits realization stuff. And so I started to really train up. I then left that organization, worked as a sort of lead BA elsewhere, and the reason I really got into it when I found it was I believed and continue to believe that it's one of those organizational roles where we can really make a difference to, customers, to people who use the services we design, and to people that use the systems and processes. And I really believe that sometimes just a few days upfront analysis can save hundreds of days, hundreds of days downstream or in production. So yeah, so I'd love to say it was a really deliberate career choice, but it was half accident, half serendipity, I think.
That's sometimes how many of us do land into careers. We become the accidental BA or the accidental project manager, and that certainly was the case for myself too. Well, great. So maybe you can, I know that you're a big fan of systems thinking. So can you just sort of provide a brief overview of what systems thinking is all about?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is systems thinking isn't just one thing. It's a whole broad set of different disciplines, and it's got a really strong academic lineage. So one of the things I find really important when speaking to others about systems thinking is to almost ask the question you've just asked. What do you mean by systems thinking? Because different people mean different things by it. For me, in my practice as a BA, it's about really thinking in systems. And I know that sounds like a bit of an abstract thing to say, but it's really odd, because in organizations, when people use the word system, generally they mean IT. And actually, they don't really mean IT, they mean T. They're not even talking about the information, they're just talking about the technology, right? And so, but whereas if you think about the word system more generally, you hear about the financial system, the healthcare system, the economic system. And so thinking in systems encourages us to take a step back, not to focus on individual components, but to look at the broader situation of interest. And the thing about a system in this sense is its boundary, like its boundary is negotiable. Different people will think it starts and stops at different places. Because if you take something big like, I don't know, the healthcare system, well, we might not immediately think that taxi drivers are part of the healthcare system, but if they're shuttling people to and from hospital, they might be a really integral part of actually the end-to-end provision of that service. So it encourages the understanding different perspectives from different stakeholders, understanding why they think something exists, and also accepting the ambiguity that in complex situations there's rarely one right answer. I think one of the big myths of change is that we can always seek consensus. I mean, it's great, and it's a real achievement if we can, but in any kind of transformational change, there are going to be some people who are really better off, and some people who it might not be good news for. So actually, there's one systems thinker who talks a lot about reaching an accommodation, a situation where at least everyone can live with it. So there's a strong link to sort of ethical, in my view, ethical communication with stakeholders. And whilst the examples I've given there are quite macro, they're quite big. It's about, like the healthcare system. You could equally zoom in and say, well, okay, what's the HR system in our organization? What's it for? Is it for, I don't know, is it for ensuring our employees are happy and safe? Or is it for ensuring we comply with legislation and don't get sued? Or is it some balance between the two? And it's really important, because if we were doing, say, a project within that HR department, like the way that you design the processes, the way that you design the information systems beneath it are going to vary. So it appreciates that everything is, everything's connected, and you can end up making a change here that makes things worse over there. And if we don't, you can end up optimizing one part and actually making the whole thing worse, because everything's sort of connected, often in ways that that it's difficult to predict in advance. So it's sort of another way of looking at it is like stepping back. It bears a family resemblance to sort of holistic thinking. And, and as I say, it's really about sort of thinking in systems, thinking about those connectivities, the fact that different observers are going to have different perspectives and boundaries and those sorts of things.
So yeah, actually, I was going to ask you about that. It seems to me like it's looking at the big picture, that holistic overview of the entire organization. So different organizations, different systems, different problems to solve, trying to understand everything from within that system, the big picture within that, and then each system, if you like.
Yeah, and the great thing I find about it, I mean, you're 100%, and the great thing I find about it, and one of the reasons it fits for me so well with business analysis, is you can zoom up and down, and you can have the idea of a subsystem within a system. Now, of course, that's not really a physical thing. It's not a physical structural thing, but you can zoom in and start to look at the more granular. But the challenge is, in most organizations I've ever worked for and with, is that everything is done at such a granular level that it's really easy to lose sight of that bigger picture. So that sort of systemic thinking encourages us to zoom out and say, okay, this might be a desirable change here for this bunch of people, but what does it mean for those bunch of people over there? And what could the knock-on impact be? And also, what are the environmental pressures outside of our organizational boundary? Because you don't want to be I don't know, this is a bit of a cliche, but you don't want to be in sort of Blockbuster Video trying to make a better membership sign-up process when Netflix is just coming round the corner. So it's involving that sort of external awareness as well.
Yeah, that's actually, I think it's much needed, which brings me to my next question on, so we have systems thinking, it's a good thing, we know it is. What are the advantages of having systems thinking in an organization?
I think one of the things I've found is that almost without exception, almost without exception on almost every project I've worked on, there's complexity that people don't want to see. And I think there's a very human natured thing to do, which is to say, oh gosh, I'm in pain. I need a solution. And that becomes a very linear knee-jerk type response. It's the kind of, well, no one's using this CRM package. Well, let's get another CRM package. But then, as BAs, right? Then the obvious question is, well, what on earth would make you think someone would use that new CRM package? But actually zooming out to understand the whole situation is often far more complex than that. And I think I think it enables us to help others to see a more complete picture of what's there, and also helps us sort of bring different perspectives together. And I think when people can accept that actually there's complexity there, no one of us can understand it individually, but together we might have enough of the puzzle to make a change. That's when I think it gets really exciting. And that fits really well with ideas of organizational agility and agile delivery mechanisms, because it's like, okay, we know, we know that the world is changing fast. We know that our customer demands are changing fast. We know no one person knows it all. But if we work together, understand as much as we can, try it, test it. If it works, do more of it. If it doesn't work, then pull it back in. So I think for so many reasons, but in the context of business analysis, for me, it's about that leveling up, seeing a higher level of abstraction, bringing others with us on that journey, and being able to sort of, as an organization, learn, pivot, and adapt to the environment.
So let's play devil's advocate here. Are you telling me that systems thinking has to do with people, not technology?
Yes, yeah. Well, and you see, it's funny, isn't it? Because like one of the terms that we hear, or I hear a lot, and you see written in, I don't know, like Harvard Business Review or wherever, or the Sloan Review, is organizational learning. Well, I mean, organizational learning surely is about people learning. I mean, don't get me wrong, there can be knowledge capture, codified knowledge in knowledge repositories, but how many knowledge repositories are actually used? Like if everyone in the organization won the lottery, most knowledge repositories are nowhere near as useful as most organizations think they are. The organizational learning, in my view, is much more about the people. And so, yeah, systems thinking, 100%, the people are such a key part of it, both in their participation, but also in the fact that actually change is it's an inherently human profession. We deal with people. It's about, the tech is hard, but the tech is easier than the people.
That's true. Actually, it's funny you mentioned change. I just read a book called Who Moved My Cheese?
Oh, yeah.
And it's all about change and how to adapt to change, which is central not just to the BA, but also to systems thinking, like you said.
Yeah. And I mean, and that book, I mean, if I recall, the storyline on that book is a mouse that goes back to where the cheese used to be, type of thing. And you do see those patterns. And I suppose, looking at that with some sort of systemic thinking, I'd wonder, well, what's driving them to do that? Is there something, what's beneath that? And also, you'd start to ask, why is there the inequality in cheese in the first place? Actually, I'm probably really overthinking that book now. I need to stop.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, it's a fascinating book. I definitely recommend every PA to read it. Okay, so let's ask you another question here. So try and provide me maybe, say, for example, two or an example of, say, two systems thinking tools, and maybe you can explain how BAs can use them within their business environment.
Yeah, there are so many. Two and a half I'll mention that are of particular use. So there are two that I often use together. These are not traditionally from the same they're from different systems thinking traditions, but a rich picture. Now, a rich picture, if you've ever got together with other stakeholders and have drawn the problem, technically that might not be a rich picture, but it'll be very, very close. And a rich picture is a way of making explicit what's implicit. And what I mean by that is, like, everyone has a different mental model, everyone has a different view on what's going on, and you can express it with words, but words are limited. Language is limiting, and actually by drawing and just stick people and arrows and and smiley faces can create a really interesting conversation. So rich pictures, and if you Google it, there's lots of really good examples out there. A more structured version is the multiple cause diagram. Now that's useful for not the most complex situations, but situations where there is, or where it's believed that there is a repeatable relationship between cause and effect. And if you've ever used a technique like 5 whys, and you've sort of ended up, it's become 5 whys and why else, because like there's never just, or very rarely just one root cause, there's multiple. That's a great diagram. And again, if you Google it, there's examples, but if you imagine like lots of words and arrows, that's sort of broadly what it looks like. There's some more nuance to it than that. And another one that I'm becoming more and more fond of is a technique known as critical systems heuristics, or CSH. And CSH at its origin was a set of questions about a system of interest, as we might call it. And that doesn't need to be a whole organization. It could be a subsystem or whatever. And it encourages us to look from different stakeholder perspectives at why that thing exists, who should own it, who should be protecting the voices of folks who aren't heard. And it's sort of interesting because you can use that in 2 modes. You can say, okay, what does this person think this thing is for, and what do they think that it ought to be for? And that can create some really interesting conversations about, okay, well, sort of forget what we are doing here. What do you think we ought to be doing? And compare that for different stakeholders. It's a great conversation starter, because very often there's this implicit disagreement that they have that nobody's ever taken the time to tease out of them. And by doing it in that structured way, it can create a really good conversation.
So just out of curiosity, is this applicable only in waterfall, agile, both?
Both. And I think that in many ways, it fits really well with agile, because there is a lot of ambiguity. And like one of the things with agile is, I suppose, well, certainly the organizations I work with, Scrum is probably the most common approach to agile I see. I see some Kanban as well, but there's always the question of, okay, so it starts with a product backlog, but how do you know what to put in there? And actually getting different perspectives on what are we even trying to do here before populating a backlog, I think is really crucial. And that's where this can really fit in, is actually understanding the situation, like almost understanding the situation and people's perspectives on it before we try and change it, which doesn't sound so radical now I've said it out loud. It sounds quite sensible.
That's pretty good. So it's probably something that a product owner should be very familiar with.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, that's a whole nother interesting conversation, is where disciplines like product ownership analysis, systems thinking, UX, project management, where all of these things intersect. And I think that's those sorts of questions we're going to be hearing more and more about in the coming years. And, because I think that's a really interesting area as well, where the racy should be on those sorts of things.
Right. Oh, that's cool. That's fascinating. Okay, so you've written a book. Actually, you've written a number of books, but one book in particular called Business Analyst. Actually, do you happen to have it on you?
Oh, do you know what? I think it's in another room. That's really embarrassing.
All right, that's fine. That's fine.
Don't.
No worries. But so, well, this is the one I'm familiar with. So try and give us sort of a brief overview of the book. You know, how can it help business analysts really?
Yeah, so this was a book where I I thought I thought there was a bit of a gap. I thought there was a bit. There's a lot of really great stuff written about business analysis, and there's excellent resources like there are books about business analysis techniques, and there's of course the BA book and many others. This is about the BA career pathway, and one of the challenges I found is that well, sometimes BA managers were setting up BA practices, and it was like, well, how do I know, what's a way of having a hierarchy of BAs? What could that look like? And also I found that there were BAs that were sort of saying, well, I don't know what my next, what's the next logical progression. And so I was really fortunate in that a whole bunch of people agreed to be interviewed. And one of the things I did was included actually summaries of some of those interviews in the back of people's sort of career stories that sort of cut down transcripts of their career stories. So it really provides, it's really for people who are either a BA looking to figure out where they go with their career, or someone who's wants to become a BA, or a manager that's setting up a BA practice and is looking to figure out how the different, the sort of different options for structures are there. So it's got a kind of career roadmap at the end of it as well.
So I'm actually curious about this logical progression. So say you're a BA, you've been in the work for a while, you want a change. What's the most common route you've seen? I've seen a lot of BAs become project managers. Is that sort of a common route, or
sorry, Marcus, did you say project or product managers?
Oh, sorry, project manager. Yeah, actually, they could become, some of them could become product managers too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can only speak from a UK perspective, and here, I think that used to be seen, and I'm probably going back 10 years or more. That was more common then, but really what I'm seeing much more of now is the fact that actually a business analyst and a project manager have parity in terms of status, and they're recognized as different disciplines. And there are people that are good at both, but like I know I would be exceptionally poor. Like I can do business analysis planning and monitoring, but I would not be a good project manager. So I think that regionally here there's a recognition that it's a different skill set. There's of course overlap. I do see BAs perhaps becoming business architects, and there's a big discussion about product manager and product owner and how all of that fits in. But equally, there's a broader discussion about what product owner means, because it doesn't really just mean what Scrum, like a product owner in Scrum. There's the product owner role in Scrum, and then there's a product owner. And those two things, one person can be both, but they're slightly different things in my view anyway.
All right, that's fascinating. So on the subject of, again, this transition into the BA world, or on to further ambitions after being a BA. So any advice for those who would like to pursue the field of business analysis or systems thinking? What are some initial entry points that a BA or someone wanting to become a BA could look at?
Yeah, so entry points into business analysis. One is, if you're in an organization already that has BAs, seek the team out. I've never met a BA that won't give their time to someone who's interested in becoming a BA. Attend their team meetings. Even if you're in an organization that doesn't have BAs, find a way of doing business analysis. One of the people I interviewed for my book, before they became a BA, they were a paramedic. And funny enough, I know the person who hired them into their first BA role, and she said she was so impressed because he demonstrated transferable skills about how you're going to a job, a person will present with symptoms, but those symptoms might not be any, they might be distracting the noise of just general life, and you've actually got to diagnose and come up with the best solution for that person, potentially while there are lots of other people, you know, looking on. And you think about it and think, well, there's a strong element of a similar, you know, it's different, but, you know, diagnosing, recommending, getting the best outcome. So I think, you know, do the business analysis. I'm always a big advocate for professional associations, whether that's IIBA, BCS, IREB, whatever is relevant for the particular you know, geography that somebody's in, and get involved at a local level, and you know, and think about certification and read blogs and that kind of thing. For systems thinking, I think you know, that's just something to really well, you can read about it, and reading about it's important, but I've learned far more by doing. And I think it's one of those things that there's perhaps a perception that you have to know, you have to be a master of it before you start. And I don't think that's true. I think you can take a manageable chunk of it, try it in a safe environment, even, you know, like maybe even try it in a team meeting or something, and then scale it up and learn more. And yeah, I mean, it will be valuable. You know, I think it's a really valuable skill set to learn.
I've had a lot of people come to me and ask, either online, you know, maybe they've reached out to me on LinkedIn, or also I'm a mentor for a couple of groups here in Calgary. And sometimes I mentor business analysts, people who are coming into the field, or sometimes because Canada is a hotbed for immigration, there's a lot of new immigrants who are transitioning from one different career to another. So, and sometimes that career is business analysis. So they ask me, you know, how can they get into it? And some of the advice I've given are some of the items that you've listed. But one thing is, you've got to do a lot of reading on it, like you mentioned. You got to do a lot of doing. But this is where those discussion groups come in. I find, you know, if you go into these discussion groups, you'll learn so much so fast.
Yeah.
You know, and from people who've been doing it for years, and they're just willing to hand out information, and it's a huge learning advantage, I think.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. And I think the business change community generally, it's very generous. You look at the amount of free webinars, you know, free blogs, discussion groups. You know, people will generally, if you approach them on LinkedIn and you've got a question, they'll answer it. So I think it is, and I think, you know, that's one of the great things with the tools we have at our disposal is, you know, we can be collaborating across the world just as easily as if we were in the same room.
Yeah, no, that's very much, yeah, 100%. Well, I certainly appreciate having this discussion with you, Adrian. It certainly is an honor. And just one last item on the agenda. Someone wants to get in touch with you from the audience. How can they do so?
Yeah, so probably the best way is connect on LinkedIn. So if you search for me, Adrian Reed, that's R-E-E-D, you'll find me, and just drop me an invite. It's always useful if you say where you found me from, because it's always nice to know that, you know, where you sort of what led you to connect. That's always handy. I have a regular sort of newsletter. If you go to badigest.co.uk, you can sign up to that, and that includes a quarterly sort of PDF journal, which you'll get sent. And I have a blog at adrianreed.co.uk, which has been going for over a decade, believe it or not. So there's a lot of back articles on there that you can read.
Hey, great stuff. Well, thanks again, Adrian. I really appreciate it. And you have yourself a great evening. I think in the UK now it's probably about, what, 6:30 or 5:30 thereabouts?
Yeah, half 5. Yeah. But Marcus, no, thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed that conversation, and yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, well, certainly have yourself a great day.
You too.